Today our case is a special request by one of my subscribers, Graham, so thank you to him for the suggestion. This case is not particularly long as there's not a lot of information. Even searching the newspaper's archives didn't bring up much. The research took a long time rather than the actual making of the video. So our case brings us to the capital once more and an area called Ballyfermot. Ballyfermot is a suburb of Dublin and is located 7 kilometres west of the city centre and south of the Phoenix Park. On Halloween night in 1995, it was no ordinary night for the residents of Ballyfermot and the nearby area known as Cherry Orchard. It is a given that on Halloween night it is very busy for the Gardaí, ambulance service and fire service. On this night, a riot will be orchestrated in the housing estate known as Gallanstown in Cherry Orchard. A gang called the Red Wall Gang were a criminal organisation that dealt in drugs, and at that time there was an epidemic proportion of heroin use in Dublin. They lured Gardaí into the area using joyriders as bait. When Gardaí chased these joyriders into Gallanstown estate, they were surrounded and driven off the streets by crowds bearing rocks and petrol bombs. The Gardaí came back in force and were driven off the streets once more. Over the course of several hours, tens of people were injured, 2 children very seriously, and dozens of arrests were made. In addition to what happened on this night, several Gardaí were so traumatised by these events it led them to take early retirement. Indeed, the Halloween riots are still viewed by the authorities as one of the most disturbing incidents of public unrest in the Republic of Ireland, until recent times of course. But this riot was not the only tragedy of the night. 15-year-old Melanie Gleeson lived in Cole Park Drive in Ballyfermot, a stone's throw away from where the riots took place. Melanie left her house at 6 p.m, telling her parents she was going to meet with friends for the night that was in it, but instead she was actually going to meet her boyfriend, who she had been going out with for 2 years. His name was Keith Kelly. He was 18 years old, lived with his parents and came from Ballyfermot also, living not far from Melanie on Cole Park Road. Being 18 years old at the time and considering Melanie was only 15 and 13 when she started dating him when he was 16, it was quite an age gap. They had begun dating in November 1993 and you could safely say it was not all smooth sailing. They had been on and off over the 2 years. When Melanie met up with Keith, she gave him money to go to the off-licence to get them drink. Here in Ireland, the legal age to drink is 18. So while Keith was of age, Melanie was most certainly not. When they got their drink, they went to a place called the Peace Gardens, which was situated on the grounds of the Dominican convent. It is now a college. It was a popular place for young teenagers to hang out and drink, and that was the plan that evening. It was also only a short distance from both their homes. As Halloween night drew to a close, Melanie's parents became concerned. By 1 a.m, there was no sign of her returning home. Melanie's mother rang Ballyfermot Garda Station and reported her daughter missing straight away. But before any search for her could begin, a gruesome discovery was made early the next morning. On the morning of the 1st of November, a young man ran out onto a road and flagged down a van that was arriving at the convent where they were to do some work. The teen told the men that he had come upon a body on the convent grounds at the Peace Garden. When the men rushed to where the young man said the body was lying, they found a young girl lying naked on the grass, and she was wearing nothing except for her black socks. She had been partially covered though by the young man's coat. Clothing that was presumably belonging to the young girl was found strewn over the carefully manicured lawn. Rubbish was also found, including empty cans of beer, which implied that a bit of a session had gone on at the spot. Gardaí were called straight away and the scene was sealed off. The young man along with the other men were questioned, the Gardaí asking them what they knew and if they knew who the young girl was. The men said they didn't know the girl, but the young man told the Gardaí that he thought it was a neighbour of his, Melanie Gleeson. Another Garda questioned everyone again later on that day, and in doing so the young man admitted that he once dated Melanie. The young man, of course, was Keith Kelly. While the Gardaí were waiting on the state pathologist, they told the men and Keith Kelly to report to Ballyfermot Garda Station to make official witness statements. Keith called that evening, and as he spoke to Gardaí, they noticed that what he had told the Gardaí at the scene of the crime and what he was telling them at the station was inconsistent. Eventually, feeling under pressure and feeling like a scumbag, his words, not mine, he broke down and through tears admitted that he had killed Melanie, but that he didn't mean to do it. He described to the Gardaí what actually happened. He said that on Halloween night he and Melanie had met in the Garden of Peace and they had sex. Afterwards, he asked her about rumours that were going around about her seeing someone else, that she had slept with him and was now pregnant. He said Melanie admitted sleeping with the other boy, but that the pregnancy rumours were just that, rumours. With this revelation, Keith said they both fought and started to call each other names. Melanie hit Keith across the face, and with this he picked up a stone that was lying on the grass beside Melanie and hit her with it across the head. Keith, when he did this, could see blood coming from Melanie's head. He also admitted that before he hit her with the stone, he had grabbed her by the throat. He also said that when he left Melanie, he thought she was still alive. Keith then walked out of the garden, continuing to drink more cider, and headed towards the River Liffey at Chapel Lizard. This is where he disposed of the stone he used on Melanie. This stone would never be recovered. On the 2nd of November 1995, Keith Kelly was arrested and questioned at Ballyfermot Garda Station, and after a full day of questioning, he was brought to the District Court in Kilmainham on the 3rd of November, where he was officially charged with Melanie's murder. He made no answer as the charges were being read out, and he was remanded in custody until trial. On the 4th of November, Melanie was brought to her local church in Ballyfermot, which was minutes from where she was found and minutes from her home where she had lived with her family. The church was full to capacity. People had to stand outside the church during the service. The children Melanie had attended school with turned up in their school uniform in honour of their school friend. A few days later, the post-mortem results were released by the state pathologist Dr. John Harbison. He had found devastating injuries to Melanie's head, including multiple fractures to her skull, and her brain was damaged so badly that the top part of the brain had become severed from the bottom part. He said there were 47 injuries in total found on Melanie's head and body. He noticed signs of manual strangulation around Melanie's neck, but said this was not the cause of death. Melanie was also alive when some of these injuries were inflicted, and she was lying on her back when being struck. He also said there were high-velocity injuries consistent with dropping a rock upon her head, and to do the degree of destruction, it would probably require lifting a rock heavy enough that you'd need to use both hands. He also confirmed that Melanie was not pregnant. On the 6th of May 1997, Keith Kelly's trial began at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. A jury of 8 men and 4 women were selected. Kelly pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder, but guilty to manslaughter. His defence stated that there was an element of provocation to the crime, resulting in a frenzied attack, and it was not a case of murder, meaning it was not premeditated and there was no intent to cause serious injury resulting in death. The state prosecution said there was not enough evidence to prove provocation, and therefore would not be accepting this. Whether Kelly killed Melanie was not in question. A list of facts were read out in court that were not being disputed by either side. The jury were shown maps and photographs of the area where Melanie was found, and where Kelly had disposed of the stone he had used to kill her. The jury were told the stone had not been recovered, even though every effort by the Garda Subaqua recovery team was made. It was also laid out in court how the Gardaí had received the call telling them that a body had been found by a teenage boy. Kelly told the Gardaí that he had gone to the Peace Garden on that day to look for a horse and instead found a body. He told Gardaí at the site that he was shocked. He recognised the girl and he used to go out with her. He told them he hadn't seen Melanie in a while, but then admitted he was with her the night before. He said that when he had bumped into her, she had blood on her face and that she had been hit by another boy. It was then the second Garda that attended the scene told Kelly and the other men to attend the Garda station in order to give their statements. That evening, this same Garda met Kelly at the station and noticed blood on his runners. They then asked Kelly to hand over these runners and pants, which he did. Kelly's story fell apart once the interview progressed. He not only admitted to being in the garden the night before, but he was the one who attacked Melanie. He also said that he had been drinking a lot that day. He had drunk 2 bottles of wine during the day and had beer that evening, so by the time he met Melanie, he was quite drunk. He then told them the reason he attacked Melanie was because she admitted to seeing another boy and she had slept with him. He also stated that this was not the first time they had got into an argument over this. A week before, Kelly had confronted her about the rumours too. After Gardaí cautioned him, Kelly said, quote, "I understand, I feel like a scumbag. I just want to get this over with." 2 young men also gave evidence that they had heard screaming on the night of Halloween as they were walking home, and it was coming from the direction of the Peace Garden. Dr. Harbison's evidence was also read out to the jury. Once closing statements by the defence and the prosecution was over, the judge gave instructions to the jury and they retired to deliberate on that same day. The jury foreman returned twice looking for redirection and clarification on the instructions given when it came to the issue of provocation. At 6:30 that evening, the jury returned with a 10-2 verdict, guilty of murder. The mandatory sentence of life was given and a hush of yes was heard from the public gallery at the same time. Meanwhile, Melanie's family sat crying, as did Kelly's family. An application for appeal was immediately granted and Kelly's free legal aid was extended. The appeal would include requiring further clarification on the provocation and excessive force defence. In June 1999, the Court of Appeal heard the case in Dublin once more. There was an issue on how the original trial judge had instructed the jury on the defence of provocation. In Irish law then, provocation was subjective interpretation of the accused. In other words, what Kelly deemed as provocation, what he thought and felt in response to Melanie's actions in that moment, whether their intent was to cause serious harm or to kill. Their reaction must be such that the person temporarily loses control of themselves. But further case law also says that the force used must be in proportion to the provocation. This is what the defence was looking for clarification on. If a person loses control, well then how are they meant to act proportionally to the provocation? How can this element be from an objective point of view? The defence said the complete loss of control was evident because of the injuries Melanie had sustained, but that personality, temperament and circumstances would also have to be considered when it came to the provocation defence, and this was not made clear to the jury before and during deliberation, and therefore their verdict was not safe. On the 20th of July 1999, the appeal judges returned with their verdict. While there was no criticism of the trial judge, the court appeal judges decided that the trial judge's charge to the jury in relation to provocation was insufficient. They also gave written instructions for the judge to use in breaking down to the jury on how to proceed in the provocation defence. Considering all this, Kelly's conviction was quashed. A retrial was ordered and Kelly was released on bail. In May 2000, Kelly's second trial began. It was argued by the prosecution that Kelly was already aware Melanie was dating other boys, which called into question how genuine his reaction to her on Halloween night was. On the 19th of May, after closing statements were given, the jury were sent out at the request of the solicitors and barristers, and when recalled they were told they were no longer needed and were being discharged from their duty. The judge told them that a legal matter had arisen, and because of this he was obliged to discharge them all. In March of 2001, the retrial begun again. Kelly still pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. All the evidence was presented to a jury once more. The prosecution told the jury, in order to use the provocation defence, they must find in the evidence that, quote, Kelly suffered a sudden and temporary loss of self-control, rendering the accused so subject to passion so as to make him for that moment not master of his own mind. Then an updated and amended charging in relation to the rules of provocation was delivered by the judge to the jury. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and came back with the verdict of guilty of murder once more. On the 30th of March 2001, Kelly was again handed down the sentence of life in prison. But in 2018, Keith Kelly, now 41 years old, was tracked down by the newspaper The Irish Sun. He had been released on licence, having secured a temporary release in 2017. In June 2018, a journalist doorstepped Kelly while he was at work in a florist in North Dublin. Initially, he didn't admit to being Kelly, but eventually he conceded that he was indeed Kelly and the man who had murdered Melanie. He also spoke a little about the murder and expressed to the journalists, quote, he was sorry. Kelly served a total of 17 years behind bars and continues to be a free man to this day. There is no evidence of Melanie sleeping with another boy, only Kelly's word, which doesn't stand for much. I tried my best to find information about Melanie, but there was very little. In the 80s and 90s, the newspapers only concentrated on the crime and the perpetrator, and not the victims or their life. So unfortunately, I'll have to depend on you lovely people that may have known Melanie and had fond memories of her, whether in school or hanging around her as friends. I will say she looked like a little dote, and as they say now, forever 15. Rest in peace, Melanie.